Welcome to the first for 2021 Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics podcast with Rhys and the great Lord Reeves, Rich Hribar. Rich, how's it going?
Guys, what's going on? We made it. Well, not made it quite yet. We're a month away from the season starting, but we're right on the door. Everyone's coming in. They're ready to draft fantasy teams. We had a preseason game last week. Everyone's kind of got football on the forefront of their minds over all the other sports. So it's kind of a great time for us because at this point of the summer, we're ready to kind of just get to the season. Where all the hot takes have been dispensed, all of our analysis has really kind of been poured out. We're ready to just draft our teams and start. I got to read Rhys's book, the most recent edition, in June, and I loved it. I appreciate that you guys gave me a little kind of peek behind the curtain, early on. But it was great, and I look forward to, like I said, one day working for Rhys under his ascension. Hopefully he doesn't forget me that I had a part in reading in it and helping out a little bit, even if it was a little bit. So I might be looking for a job here in the next couple of years.
Oh, so two things. Rhys's book, same name, Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics, is up on Amazon. And you mentioned the NFL season, the Thursday Hall of Fame game, Rich, going against head-to-head to the Olympics. Still drew 7 million viewers, more than any NBA game last year. The NFL market is strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone was tuning in for Ben DiNucci. We were looking for Ben DiNucci, hair on fire, sidearm throws, because that's all we need in August.
Oh, yeah.
So speaking about, breakout players like Ben DiNucci, because we all know he's going to be starting week 1 for the Cowboys. Who do you expect to establish a role for their offense based off their preseason play?
Rhys, you mean all the players that in the NFL who you think is going to emerge?
Yes, but mostly for the offense.
I mean, well, just some guys that we're looking for in preseason. Remember last year we didn't even have any preseason, so we didn't even get this. It was a lot of kind of guesswork. We're actually going to get to see over the course of the next 3 weeks. I don't know if that last week how many reps guys are going to get, if they're going to treat it like the old school fourth game where they remember there's always a ramp up where you didn't play a lot in the first game, then you ramp up the second game, play like a half in the third game, and then kind of just get one drive or no reps in the fourth game because it was kind of you didn't want to get hurt at the very tail end. But with the 3 games, it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of disperse snaps. But remember last year not having it, we didn't get any clues in on any of the rookies. Is he working with the ones? Is he working with the twos? When this team goes 3 wide receivers, was this guy kicking the slot? We didn't get any of that last year. Remember we had some new offenses, a team like the Panthers last year. What if we would have known in the preseason that it was going to be Robbie Anderson running the intermediate routes, DJ Moore being the vertical deadlifter? It might have changed people's kind of opinions, coming in the season. So this year we're going to get to see some of that over the course of the next couple of weeks. Guys getting to work in. I can tell you a couple situations that I'm looking forward to kind of seeing it under that light. One would be the Panthers. I do want to see Joe Brady kind of diversify the way he used those pass catchers last year. We would like to see Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore kind of their roles merge what they were last year. And you're adding a big slot guy like Terrace Marshall. He's not direct overlap at all by any means of what Curtis Samuel was brought to the party as a wide receiver in that offense last year. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of diversify the roles there if they do at all. But then, we got these rookie situations. We've got both of the rookie quarterbacks that we know that probably won't start week 1, but they might start soon. And Trey Lance and Justin Fields, how are those guys going to look in the preseason? We absolutely, the 49ers in general, we want to see is Trey Sermon. Is he a guy that's going to be working with the ones early? How does he fit in with Raheem Mostert? If you look at Raheem Mostert, his career so far, the last 2 years of the 49ers, he has more rushing touchdowns outside of the red zone than inside of the 5-yard line, which is pretty unheard of for a running back. Just 3 of 15 for the last 2 years in the 49ers and converting those carries inside the 5, while other 49ers backs are 18 of 54, or 18 of 34 converting those carries. So right around 50%, there's a big gap there. So there's an area where Trey Sermon can immediately come in, get goal line work on an offense that we already know has a pretty tremendous schedule layout. And then if Trey Lance, takes over, it's going to add a different dynamic to this offense. So there's a lot of rookies, seeing how they fit in. We kind of were talking about the show about the Jaguars a little bit. What is their offense going to look like? Is it going to be more Urban Meyer? Is it going to be more Darrell Bevelbrat and Schottenheimer? How does this thing kind of congeal together? We're going to have preseason games this year to kind of figure out like what kind of stuff they're working on and what they're running. I don't think we'll have a situation like we did 2 years ago with Cliff Kingsbury. Remember when Cliff tried to do nothing in the preseason and they were just a train wreck? And then they were a little slow out of the gates that year too, because they just didn't work on enough in preseason trying to hide stuff. I remember they had like a Monday night preseason game with Kyler Murray and he was just awful. Just abysmal, the offense they were trying to run because they're trying to hide stuff. And then Cliff said if he had to do that over, they wouldn't have done that. They would have actually in game worked on some stuff. We've got, Arthur Smith changing to Atlanta. Like what kind of, we're going to see that situation play out, the chicken and egg versus what the Titans efficiency was last 2 years. Who gets the credit? Was it just Ryan Tannehill? Was it Arthur Smith? Now we're going to have Arthur Smith in Atlanta. They don't have Julio Jones anymore for the first time in a decade. We're going to see Kyle Pitts. Is he working in line? There's just a lot of kind of scenarios here where we've had player movement. We're going to get to see new systems being implemented in this kind of, it's not like glorified practice anymore like people used to treat it as. It actually is actual information that you can watch and you can kind of take data from and kind of apply to what we're going to have going forward into our drafts these last couple of weeks of August, and kind of finalize some of our thoughts on some of these players. I know that wasn't kind of the answer you're looking for, a couple of breakouts, but those are like just some of the things I really am just like top down thinking about what like being excited for come Thursday and the next coming weeks.
So 2 follow-ups. How about I'm going to give you 3 situations and you just run with them. If you're drafting super flex type of league, which Houston quarterback do you go after? Which New Orleans quarterback do you go after? Because I think those are difficult. In which late, because they're all late, but Lions receiver do you go after? Because they're going to be playing from behind a lot.
Yeah, those are all interesting. I mean, so if you're in a super flex league with Houston, I mean, I definitely believe that there is enough kind of fire to the smoke that Deshaun Watson is not going to play for that team again, right. By either, process of trade, suspension, or a combination of all the above. So, I mean, we know Tyrod's going to start, but there's no way they're going to be good enough to just not play Davis Mills at some point. So we're going to see kind of Davis Mills eventually play. Even I know he hasn't been getting any glowing reports in camp, but the point is Houston's just going to be too bad not to take a look at him. So if they use the 3rd round pick on a quarterback, there's just no reason for them not to at least look at it if they're going to be staring at down the gun barrel of being able to take another quarterback highly next year to kind of replace Deshaun Watson. So I would expect, Tyrod to start. He really was not good the last time we saw him as a starter in Cleveland. I know last year he got kind of a raw deal, only getting to start the 1 game before the accidental injection. But that team's just not going to be good enough to have him start throughout. He's not the future of the franchise. They're going to take a look at Davis Mills at some point. The Saints are really interesting because when you look at what they did last year and in 2019 with Teddy Bridgewater, it's different when you just have to plug a hole for a month. Right. And what the Saints did the last 2 years when Drew Brees basically missed 4 games each season was they went hyper conservative. They went really run heavy, tried to just play turnover free football, limit mistakes, play good defense. And that was it. Get by until Brees comes back. And they were really good. And they were successful both years doing that. That would lean towards you saying, well, that means they're going to go to Taysom Hill, right? That's really hard to sustain that brand of football over the course of 17 games. You can do it as like a relief pitcher, as a spot starter. Get me through this month. Maybe we go 2-2, we go 3-1, like Taysom did last year. But to go for 17 games and play that style of football, you're going to need more upside. Because when you look at the Saints splits of the past 2 years with and without Brees, they lost 7 points per game in those games, and they lost over a point per drive when they had to go Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill. The record was fine because they got through stretches of the season. But then when you think about last year too, when Taysom comes in, he gets 2 games against the Falcons. They have the Kendall Hinton game, which basically should be stricken from the records as a real football game altogether. And then they lose that game into the Eagles and Jalen Hurts' first start. So it's not like he had like a lot of quality wins under his belt either. So I think it's a really fragile way to play football. I think we'll end up seeing both guys. The other element in play is that both of those years, when Drew Brees was gone, they still had Michael Thomas on the field, and they just jammed him with targets in all those stretches. He actually had a higher target rate in the games without Brees than he had with Brees over that span. We have a 12-game sample of Brees with Michael Thomas's career either leaving the field early or missing the game entirely, and he has a 33% target share in those games.
Wow.
That is bonkers. That's like Brandon Marshall the Chicago Bears season when he just like was just getting peppered with targets repeatedly. So I mean, they don't have Michael Thomas now. We know they're not going to have him. He's probably going to be on the PUP, and they have a week 7 bye, I believe. They've either a week 6 or week 7 bye, so it's an extra week that they're not, he's not going to be on fantasy rosters because he's going to miss an extra game. So it's going to be a really interesting dynamic. I think we're going to see both guys. I don't know if a 2 QB system could work, but it would seem that, if they're playing with a lead or if they're in control of games, Taysom would be the guy. And when you've got to pass your way out of things, it would be Jameis Winston, but they just don't have the weaponry. I mean, I'm a little bit intrigued by Marcus Callaway. Traquan Smith's in a final year's contract. He hasn't broken out. They're counting on Troutman to take a huge step forward. If you remember 2 years ago, they traded the rest of their entire draft to trade up for Troutman. They traded every other pick they had in the draft to just trade up and get Troutman. So they're definitely high on him. But just, this is an offense that's really going to try the first basically 6 weeks of the season to run their offense, the passing game through a running back, which is really hard to do in today's NFL. The Saints are going to be really interesting. The Lions schedule is just so miserable too for their situation. It's so tough because, Jared Goff's got kind of a raw deal. I don't think Jared Goff is by any means an elite quarterback. But Jared Goff was the number 1 pick overall. He was a guy that did have some talent. He's become such a punching bag, and he's been now placed in this situation where he's basically a patsy. He's just not in a situation to win at all. The offensive line is good there. I think they will be able to run the football a little bit, at least while game script allows them to. But it's TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift, and you look at these other receivers, Rashad Perriman. He's never had 40 catches in an NFL season. Tyrell Williams hasn't had more than 43 catches in a season since 2016. Quintez Cephas, 20 catches as a rookie. They've got Khalif Raymond. It's just not a situation that's going to really breed any type of positive outcome for Jared Goff. I would say that if I'm going to take a flyer on any of those guys, I just lean towards Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was the guy that, was miscast 2 years ago as a boundary receiver. Last year he was miscast as an outside receiver, and 2 years ago when Michael Pittman was there, he thrived in the slot. And that's what he is. He's basically a glorified big slot guy, which is fine because that's going to suit into kind of Jared Goff's kind of, where his rhythm throws come from. Goff's not a guy that's going to push the ball downfield, which is interesting because all they've built that offense around outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown is all guys that go vertical. Tyrell Williams, Rashad Perriman, Khalif Raymond, Quintez Cephas, those are all vertical receivers. So, I mean, it's a bummer that Goff basically – it's going to be tough for him to, what I'm saying is it's going to be tough for him to have like a Ryan Tannehill-esque turnaround just because of the situation he's put in. The situation is not doing him a lot of favors.
Another thing about you mentioned Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill went from Adam Gase to Arthur Smith. And now Goff is going from Sean McVay to someone who's saying that they will bite the kneecaps off their opponent.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's one of those. I guess I lean Perriman because he looked okay a little bit last year, but you bring up a good point. It may be just best to, go all in on Hawk and hope he gets 150 targets or whatever.
Right.
I mean,
decent chance.
Yeah.
And even DeAndre Swift is no chump in the passing game.
Or
Jamal Williams.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very intermediate, shallow passing game, which is funny because we talked about all the receivers they added. But yeah, you talk about Hawk and Amon-Ra and then Swift and Jamal Williams out of the backfield. That's kind of like the strength of their talent. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Their schedule is just such a nightmare. You just try to find some wins because I was looking at it. It's like, well, they have a good offensive line, and we know they're going to have between Anthony Lynn and Dan Campbell, they're going to want to run the football while they can, but then you just go down their schedule and you're just like, oh, this is rough.
Yeah.
This is a real rough outlook trying to squeeze out some W's on the schedule.
Oh yeah.
So who are some of the players or even situations that the fantasy community is not as high as they should be on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Trying to think off the top of my head, just the people might be kind of down on maybe from an offensive stance. This is just grasping off the top of my head here. Just really, really reaching.
Do you want me to throw you some names?
Yeah. Hit me with some just
All
to
right.
get the wheels turning here.
Galladay, Beckham, Odell.
Oh, well, the Browns are, I didn't know, but people are high on the Browns though, right?
but not Beckham for fantasy. Beckham's like he's not, none of the receivers are that rated for fantasy. And I would even throw in like Sutton for his boys, or I don't know. There's just, like there's some guys that we just in the fantasy community are slow to get up to speed on. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Yeah, I was thinking on the team level. Denver is a great one though. When you talk about Denver, because we don't know what we're gonna get out of Drew Lock. I would assume that they want him to win the job, but there's no lock. Yeah, no pun intended either. There's no lock to win the job. But you look at the style of football Denver wants to run. So obviously, you got Vic Fangio as a head coach. They've got a really good defense, and what they're positioned to do is just not have a guy lose you games. Like Drew Lock has basically kind of been in this from a turnover perspective. His 2 years into his career. He had the good QB win-loss record as a rookie, but really didn't do anything to help them win any of those games. So a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, who is not exciting, he's kind of on an Alex Smith kind of level, but he's not going to lose you games. And you have a defensive-minded head coach on the first hand, like that's going to adhere to the qualities of Vic Fangio, especially a guy that's now in his third year as a head coach. Like he's got to win some games this year. And then you talk about just what Drew Lock did in terms of these pass catchers, because when you look at the Denver pass catchers, I mean, they sunk a lot of capital into these guys: Noah Fant, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Albert O, KJ Hamler. They've invested into these kind of skill players, and they had the lowest catchable target rate in the NFL last season. So getting a guy like Teddy, the Carolina Panthers were 7th in catchable target rate. Getting the ball into these players' hands that you can sunk all this capital in could actually make these guys, give them a nice little turnaround too in fantasy as well. I do like Jeudy a lot. He definitely kind of checks out early in his career to be like a DJ Moore, like ready to make that DJ Moore like jump. I don't think the touchdowns will really be there, but just getting a guy that can kind of pepper him with targets. He's very Stephon Diggsian in a way too, that he's just really good on all levels. But just probably not going to score a lot of touchdowns early in his career. He actually didn't even catch an end zone target or a target in the red zone last season as a rookie. And then Sutton, coming off of that ACL, we've seen some that turn. He's getting some more positive reports. I like him a lot in keeper formats because where he goes in ADP, because there's still kind of a mass situation. Even if Teddy plays, like his touchdowns probably come down. He's more of those like high cholesterol target guy, like a Mike Williams on the Chargers, a guy that's going to run vertical routes and win these clashing situations. That's not really Teddy's game if he takes over at some point in the season. But when you look at Cortland Sutton big picture, he'll be a year removed away from the ACL. Does Denver add Aaron Rodgers if he stays in Denver? And then he's also a restricted free agent next year, so he can go somewhere else and possibly potentially run into a better situation as well. He's a really intriguing guy in keeper formats. Michael Gallup is like that as well, because we've already seen Dallas say they're not going to extend him in season. So he could basically go and run into a better situation next year, being a 1B or a wide receiver 2 on a team next year. The Brown situation with Odell, because Odell's such a polarizing guy, like you brought up. What's interesting is the Browns actually, once they cleared those 2 games, like the horrendous weather, remember they played the Raiders and the Texans, and like those windstorms and rainstorms. But when they came out of that, they actually were more aggressive throwing the football on early downs, and the offense was really good. That's when they hit their stride going into the playoffs last year. And even Baker was a top 12 quarterback in 4 of his final 6 games last season, and that was without Odell. They, learning a new system in the pandemic year. I think Baker got really comfortable as the season wore on, and now adding a guy like Odell Beckham to that comfort level, I think is only going to help. It's not a negative that the splits when they say, well, maybe the Browns offense was better with Odell Beckham. Stop that. It's not, there's no way that that's true at any level when you have a talent like Odell Beckham is. An interesting thing for fantasy is he's the cheapest he's ever been at this point in his career, because we really haven't had a full season of him since 2016. But we had a little glimpses last year before he tore the ACL. You think about that Cowboys game where he looked like the Odell Beckham of old, where like remember Odell was like, if he touches the ball, it could be a touchdown. That's like where we were with him when he was in the early stages of his career. And it felt like that a little bit last year. Like we're getting to that type of player back. And then you compound things with the injury. But I actually did a study at Sharp Football Analysis on discounted wide receiver ones, and Kenny Galladay kind of falls into this, tier 2, and you brought up his name. Because a lot of people ask the question when you're in your draft, you're saying, well, I'm going to take this guy because he's the this team's wide receiver 1 versus this guy that might be the wide receiver 2 on his team or the third target, but it's a better offense. But I actually showed that in the wide receiver 3 portion of the drafts, like we were talking about the outside of the top 24 receivers up to like wide receiver 40, that those team wide receiver 1s have just smoked the non-team wide receiver 1s. In terms of beating ADP, finishing as wide receiver 2s are higher, finishing as wide receiver 1s are higher, and even having top 6 seasons in fantasy football. And we have guys like Kenny Galladay, Brandon Ayuk, Odell Beckham, all in that section of the draft now that fit that profile, that are going under some guys like Chase Claypool, he could be the number 1 wide receiver on the team, but he also could easily be the number 3 target on the team. You've got a guy like T. Higgins. Like, we don't know how the targets are going to disperse this season in Cincinnati. I mean, all 3 of those guys are going to get targets, but will he be the alpha remains to be seen. But those guys are going ahead of those guys in ADP right now. And history has shown that the team wide receiver 1s in that area of the draft have been way more bankable bets and have outkicked their coverage more often than those other players.
It's almost like Rhys, I have one for you. You ready?
Sure.
Mecole Hardman or Galladay? Because they have pretty close ADPs, don't they, Rich? I mean, fairly close.
Well, there's a little surge now, but Galladay still goes like around he's been going around wide receiver 30 in redraft leagues, especially after the hamstring injury. Hardman's starting to climb. He went wide receiver 44 in a current draft I'm in right now with a bunch of industry guys. So he's starting to climb a little bit, but they haven't quite overlapped yet. Hardman's going to be one of those guys too. Like, it's just, if he climbs a little bit higher, it gets harder to pull on. But when he is like around wide receiver 50, it's just like still year 3 wide receiver attached to Patrick Mahomes. Like, it's still asymmetrical upside, right? Like, even if you're down on the player, I don't think through 2 years, Mecole Hardman's really showed a lot of nuance as a wide receiver.
Right.
Obviously still a big play guy, but just hasn't shown a lot where he can just win as a wide receiver, all the time. Right. But when you're talking about just having just a cheap guy attached to Patrick Mahomes who can create big plays, and he's the wide receiver 50, it's kind of worth the squeeze. Now he starts to climb a little bit, and you got to take him over guys like Darnell Mooney, kind of guys in that area that have shown that they do have actually some actual wide receiver acumen to their games. Then it gets a lot harder, I think, when you're talking about taking him over guys like Brandon Cooks, who was wide receiver 42 in the same draft, and Hardman goes, 2 picks there, guys like DJ Shark, guys that have really shown that they actually can play the wide receiver position. Then it kind of gets into an area where, that asymmetrical upside starts to wane. So it's gonna be interesting to see where he finishes, because he's gotten really all positive buzz so far in camp. But also, like I said, through 2 years of actual on-field production, like, he really has just not shown a lot of ways he can win as an actual wide receiver.
Oh yeah. So let me hit you with a different one then. All right. Let's see. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Julio Jones or Mike Evans?
I'll take it.
Ooh, that's a good one now. Because when you look at Julio Jones in terms of career arc, obviously we're getting there. Approaching the 11th hour with Julio, where it could just be this is his last season, right? Like, it might be it for Julio. But if you look at his play last year, we're not there yet. In his full games he played last year, he averaged 100 receiving yards per game. He was still an interesting dynamic here is how he fits with the Tennessee Titans. Julio was number 1 in the NFL in EPA on throws 10 through 19 yards, the intermediate targets. And who was the number 1 quarterback in EPA on those throws? Ryan Tannehill. So you get that play action game, and you get Julio running these digs, and the linebackers get sucked up. Like, it's a really nice fit for Julio. Whereas you look at this Bucs situation, and Mike Evans last year really saved his bacon last year just by scoring a ton of touchdowns. He actually was second behind Adam Thielen in percentage of PPR fantasy points that come just from touchdowns alone. It's going to be really hard for him to sustain that. He also had the lowest target share he's had in his NFL career last year. He also set career lows in targets per game, receptions per game, and yardage per game. So if he does have those touchdowns kind of come back a little bit, the floor gets a little bit lower than it even was last year. And his weekly floor wasn't the greatest. He actually had his fewest amount of wide receiver 1 scoring weeks they had in a season for his career as well. So you look at this Bucs team and the way it's constructed with Tom Brady, there's going to be a lot of oscillation here week to week. There's going to be weeks where it's an Evans week. There's going to be a week where it's an Antonio Brown week. There's a week where it's a Godwin week. There's going to be weeks where the tight ends get going because they're getting OJ Howard back too. They've got capable tight ends. You add Gio as a capable pass catcher to his backfield. this team is just going to have a lot of fluctuation because it's filled with good players and they're productive players. But Tom Brady and this offense is going to ride what's going that week, right? Like, where's the game plan? Where are we attacking the defense? And there's gonna be weeks where it's gonna be one of those guys one week and then one the next. And we kind of saw that kind of play out even through the playoffs, where it was, you'd have Antonio Brown as kind of making a play, but then even in the Super Bowl, those guys had no receptions. They all had 3 or fewer receptions. So they're going to really eat each other up a little bit. I do like Julio a little bit more because I think that there's there's a more narrow target tree. When the Titans throw the football, they're throwing it to AJ Brown, or they're throwing to Julio Jones. Probably get a little bit extension for Ferguson, but we just don't know where. Like, he's not a guy that's also going to command a lot of targets either. Maybe he makes that jump, but we know when they throw the football, it's going to those 2 players because they're not even going to really incorporate anyone out of the backfield a lot. No. Maybe Darrington Evans gets some more burn, but we know Derrick Henry's not going to command a large target share. So Julio Jones, I still think, even though he is approaching that 11th hour and his career arc is saying, you Jeff, you're in dynasty leagues, what do you do with Julio? Like, you can't sell him for any value. You said either get off or you just ride into the sunset. And I think I'm ready to ride this thing into the sunset.
Oh yeah. I'm a buy and ride, because you can't get production easily.
But I'm not even convinced Antonio Brown's not the wide receiver 1 down in Tampa.
Right.
Because he's Brady's guy. He led the team in target share over since like week 10 the second week coming back to Tampa, and versus Julio, who he's the wide receiver too, but you still also know there's not 2 other people eating up targets, because as you were saying earlier, 1 wide receiver 1 is not even close to equal of 2 lower end wide receivers in terms of targets that they take up.
So Rich, is that right? You have those numbers that Brown really had the dominating target share there?
Well, they had remember they had some guys go in and out of the lineup at that span. So when there was through the playoffs, I do have it where they had all 3 guys healthy, and mind you, there's no OJ Howard in these games as well. So they played 10 full games together, and the targets were Evans 73, Godwin 71, Antonio Brown 59, but the catches were 45, 46, 42. Pretty much as layered in as you can get. Evans had the big overhead though, as he had 8 end zone targets, and Godwin and Brown combined for 6. They each had 3. Because Gronk still was kind of the other guy. They used, when they got in the red zone, they really peppered Evans and Gronk. Those are the guys they really used to score touchdowns. It's interesting. OJ Howard cuts into that, because the 2 games OJ Howard played, he also had 4 end zone targets early in the season. So it's gonna be really kind of interesting if that just kind of takes away a little bit from Evans. But yeah, I mean, there's gonna, like I said, it's really gonna be a week to week thing, I think, with these Buccaneers, not just the receivers, with the tight ends and the running backs too. It's gonna be weeks where it's just they've got a lot of talent, and they've got a guy in Tom Brady that is just gonna attack the defense where they're most vulnerable. He's done that his entire career. So there's gonna be a lot, I think, of oscillation in terms of who comes out ahead that particular week for the Buccaneers playmakers in general, not just the receivers, but the backs and tight ends as well.
But I do think Rhys is peering into a crystal ball, just because Evans and Godwin missed a lot of games down the stretch, and neither has been that durable. Brown really has, other than his off the field reasons for missing games. But, down the stretch, Brown was like a receiver 1 or 2 for most weeks for fantasy down the stretch, wasn't he? I mean, he had some. Yeah,
he was top 30 in targets, catches, and receiving yards when he joined the Bucs. And listen, him and Brady they've had that mind meld. Remember, 2 years ago when he just joined the Patriots, like basically the week of a game, and him and Brady connected on like every target but one against the Dolphins. And then, he was basically, got suspended the rest of the season. They released him. Because that was basically the tumultuous year for Antonio Brown. A lot of things were going on with him, but you've seen even last year, like when he could still play too, like he's another guy that it's not like he can't play anymore. and he was their big play guy. He was the guy that was getting like the shot plays when they added him. And he had a huge game when Mike Evans left against the Falcons, where he had 14 targets, and just went bonkers that game. But yeah, he can still play. He's and all like the camp news has been really positive towards Antonio Brown. I think Bruce Arians even had a quote today talking to us as good as he's looked since he's been there. That's why I said, man, the Bucks are a tricky situation because we know that their offense is going to score points. They're going to score a bunch of points, but like, how do we glom onto one specific player from a week-to-week basis on this roster? I think there's going to be a lot of headaches where you run into some lean weeks on guys, but you're just going to have to fight through. If you got one of those guys, you just have to leave them in your lineup if you want to catch the best of them, because you might miss out on a big week too.
Yeah, I think Rhys will be proven right on this one. But I'm an Antonio Brown fantasy fan more than like the other stuff.
And he's the cheapest guy. I mean, typically when you get in these situations, everyone just says, listen, man, take the cheapest guy.
Yeah, because Godwin and Everett are roughly going around wide receiver 13 through 16, 17, and Brown's going wide receiver 40s with Mecole Hardman.
And Galladay. So that puts your one to the test, right? Where's Galladay? Did you say 40?
30.
He's dropping around wide receiver 30 now. He was floating right around like the wide receiver 2-3 cutoff, but since he had the hamstring injury, it's started to trickle down, and literally every report from the Giants has been negative. From Giants camp has been negative this offseason so far.
Joe Judge for president.
So hopefully they can turn it around, but it's been a nightmare, man, so far for the Giants fans. A lot of people were banking on hopefully a Josh Allen like third season from Daniel Jones, and I think that those types of seasons that Josh Allen had were induced by a lot of smart people in charge, like Brian Daboll, flipping his kind of narrative on what he was and how he called plays throughout his career. The Bills put Josh Allen in just a tremendous situation to succeed and maximize everything by bringing Stephon Diggs, throwing the ball heavy on first downs, also reining in his deep ball and lowering his ADOT, giving him more bunnies and more successful throws. The Giants still have Jason Garrett in that offensive line. It's just really hard to think that Daniel Jones has one of those types of breakouts in him. I hope he does play better than he did last year. But just to believe he has a Josh Allen like breakout, I'm going to say that's probably pretty low probability.
I don't even think he has a Ryan Tannehill type of breakout in him. You mentioned Buffalo giving Allen some bunnies. What's interesting is doing it without receiving out of the backfield or tight end receptions. You know what I mean? Like, they don't throw the tight end, they don't throw to the running back, but they still hammer those shorter ADOT throws.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically their entire passing game, and they were number one in the NFL and passing on first down. Josh Allen led the league in a percent of throws on first down of his own pass attempts, and his splits were just tremendously more successful on those first down throws than not. He still would give us glimpses of being the Josh Allen from the previous 2 years under pressure. He was 36 in differential from throws, yards per pass attempt from a clean pocket under pressure. So when teams could pressure him, we still saw some of those mistakes. And then, like I said, when he was forced to throw on like third down, long down distances, it really recoiled, and we saw some of that as well too. So the Bills really put him in a great spot. I mean, Stephon Diggs, I mean, what's crazy is I wouldn't have thought going into last year, even being high on Stephon Diggs as a player, that it was going to be that situation that unlocked the best ceiling for Stephon Diggs. He was always a guy that we knew was just immensely talented, and it hadn't come into fully together yet because, he had played so many different roles and played at so many different quarterbacks. He went from Teddy Bridgewater, Case Keenum, to Sam Bradford, and to Kirk Cousins, and he played all these different roles as a lid popper. He was just a shallow slot guy at one point. He did all these things and he did them well. We knew that the full-on talent was there, and that this was the situation that just broke open the bank. Playing with Josh Allen, who had been inaccurate for the first 2 years of his career, Brian Daboll, who was a non-aggressive, offensive coordinator, as a play caller, and it all changes this last season in 2020, and it brings out the best of Stephon Diggs, and he was just an absolute monster the entire season. So I mean, yeah, it's pretty crazy, but yeah, Diggs was always a guy to bet on for talent. I just wouldn't have thought that this was the situation that would have really made the ceiling all come together.
Oh yeah.
So we mentioned players that we're high on, but what about players that we are too high on to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple guys. I mean, I think Justin Herbert is one of those guys. I mean, I think that he's a guy that improves as a quarterback. The situation's just so much better for him. Getting rid of, Anthony Lynn, another guy that was just put Justin Herbert in just terrible situations. 42.3% of his pass attempts are in bad spots, down second through four, needing 7 or more yards to go. And then this offensive line is just so much better. I mean, being able to get Corey Linsley, Rashawn Slater, add those guys like Matt Flyer from the Pittsburgh. You get an extra season of Brian Bulaga, who missed time last year. The offensive line's better. I think that they take a step forward as an offense, but from a fantasy stance, I believe that he comes back. Just the way he won last year, under pressure, long down and distances. The Chargers had the 5th highest, split in terms of passing touchdowns to rushing touchdowns. Those things will probably even tighten up either. They probably have more rushing touchdowns this season they did a year ago. And he's not like a full-on runner like a lot of the guys that above him in ADP go. So he doesn't have that out either of having a game where he's going to hit you with 60 rushing yards or hit you with a couple rushing touchdowns. He could be used as a goal line runner like Josh Allen. He's big and athletic like that, but he's just not going to guy that's going to take off and run for that many yards compared to the guys that go ahead of him, like the Lamars, Kyler, Josh Allen, even Russell Wilson. He's not going to have as much rushing yards as him. So I think that where he goes in ADP is really tricky because at quarterback, you just don't need to extend yourself if it's not one of those guys that have one of those like really immensely high dual outlet ceilings. And I think, like I said, there's enough regression cooked in that I think some people will probably be a little bit disappointed if they don't get a top 5 season out of him. And then trying to think like at other positions, at running back, basically anyone that doesn't catch passes is really tricky. I had Jonathan Taylor as a 2nd rounder, so this just kind of course corrected. The injuries to Wentz and Quentin Nelson kind of pulled things back. This is a team that when you look at their schedule, there's a very good chance they're going to start 0-5. Especially if they're not going to have Carson Wentz, a capable quarterback play under center. They get really put behind the 8 ball. And we know Nyheim Hines is going to be in that, play from behind, catch up mode role. So Jonathan Taylor could really have another slow start like he did last year. I think he'll be fine over the course of the big picture of the season, but he's a guy, if you take when you take him as a 1st rounder, you're probably going to be a little bit let down, but now it's kind of course corrected. He is a 2nd rounder, so I think it's palatable. Jamar Chase is a guy just where his ADP is, just really tough to squeeze. We're going right around wide receiver 22 as a rookie wide receiver. The only other rookie wide receiver to be close to him in ADP, Amari Cooper, was wide receiver 20. If you go ahead, previously Julio was the next highest rookie wide receiver in ADP at wide receiver 28. I just think what the rookie wide receivers did last year are really getting cooked into this with the season Justin Jefferson had. Then you had also, positive outcomes from, Brandon Ayuk, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, all those guys had positive seasons, and it's getting kind of overcooked into kind of what people wanted to chase that a little bit with Jamar Chase. Again, no pun intended on the last name play. But there's just too many good receivers he goes around that I believe are bankable and have bankable floors for me to invest that kind of draft capital on just an unknown, really. We've seen wide receivers, even the best wide receiver prospects, come in and have slow starts or come in and fail outright. So for me to take him around proven players is really tough altogether. And then at tight end, I really don't have a guy because there are only like 5 good ones and the rest we're all just selling at upside anyways. So if you have your flavor of choice outside of maybe after Mark Andrews, I'm really not going to push back on it. My favorite guys out of those good groups is probably Irv Smith. Just because of the Vikings passing schedule is so good the front half of the season. He's a guy that gets money targets. 22% of his targets have come in the red zone over his career, the first 2 seasons. If you want to talk about Tyler Conklin cutting into some of his routes, through 2 years in the NFL, Irv Smith has 9 end zone targets and 9 targets inside the 10. Conklin has just 2 of each. So when the bread's getting buttered, Irv has still been the guy that they use in kind of those foxhole situations and scoring touchdowns. So he's probably my favorite choice outside of those guys. But I think there's a case to be made for a lot of guys like we do every year at tight end. And then every year, none of them really work out, but that's all right.
I have one for you on that. I think Gerald Everett reuniting.
Oh, yeah, I like Gerald Everett.
And if we go back over history, Will Dissly was a top 6 tight end over a stretch, and points per game. It's not a stretch to think that Everett will be a top 5, top 6 tight end. at the end of the season.
So the past 4 years, Russell Wilson has been first or second in end zone targets in the NFL, throws into the end zone, first or second, the last 4 years. So, when you got a tight end, you're taking a tight end flyer. One, it's not bad just attach them to a good quarterback anyways, but a guy that is going to offer some scoring touchdown upside because, if you can just score a bucket of touchdowns at tight end, like that's going to get you, it's going to get you into the mix of being a tight end one.
Oh yeah. Rhys, who do you like in that you think people are overlooking?
Yeah. Oh,
You have a favorite tight end dart throw? If you miss out on one of the
probably Fan. I'll tell you the other guy, he's not a tight end, that a receiver, I think, and I think you like him, that's being underappreciated is Thielen right now. And only because Jefferson's hurt or nicked up, Thielen could have a receiver 15 to 20 season. Is that reasonable, Rich?
Yeah, he just did it last year, and another one, narrow target tree, and there's not a lot of depth behind them. So as long as he stays on the field, the targets are going to be there for him. And he's a guy, he led the NFL in end zone targets last year. He's a guy, he will have some regression in terms of scoring. 65% of his end zone targets were touchdowns last year. Prior to his career, he had converted just 40% of those for touchdowns. There will be a little regression there, but there's nothing there as long as he stays healthy. After Justin Jefferson, this depth chart, BC Johnson, D.D. Westbrook, Braden Zylstra, BB, the ball's got it. It's like we talked about with the Titans. The ball's going to, when they throw the football, it's going to Thielen, Jefferson, and Smith. And, they're going to mix in Dalvin Cook.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot of depth. So as long as he stays on the field, he probably is a touch undervalued at this point.
Another one of those narrow target trees is the Packers.
Yeah.
The narrowest.
You have Adams, Bob Tonyan, and Aaron Jones.
And a little bit of Cobb, whatever's left of his career.
Yeah, Devontae Adams is set up just again. He's another guy, like we can't count him to catch probably 18 touchdowns again. And Aaron Rodgers to have the touchdown production that he had last year, especially Aaron Rodgers threw 8 touchdowns from the 1 yard line last year. That's just silly. So there'll probably be a little bit of reversion there as well. But if you look at Adams, he still scored double-digit touchdowns in 4 of the past 5 years. He had the most PPR points per game in any season since Jerry Rice in 1995, the most standard receiving points per game since Randy Moss in 2007, the year he joined the Patriots. And you talked about it, like they didn't add anything to really threaten things. They add Randall Cobb, who's 31 years old, hasn't had 900 yards in basically the last 6 years in any season. You add Amari Rodgers, who's now going to get reverted to like the jet motion guy, a package player with them adding Cobb, and they still got Valdez-Scantling and Lazard. Devontae Adams is going to get peppered with targets repeatedly again. There's just no way around it. He's going to get jammed with as much targets as he can handle again.
Oh, yeah. And you are high on Thielen, aren't you?
Yes. He's one of my playing my flags in my book.
And so, but Thielen's ADP is what? In the low 20s?
Yeah, like right around like a lower end wide receiver 2 right now.
Yeah. I just think he's receiver 15, 18 kind of range kind of guy. In fact,
you see a lot of these drafts now, people are shooting their shots a little bit on guys around Thielen's ADP. Like I said, we brought up Claypool earlier in the show. Jamar Chase goes around there. Deontay Johnson. But Chris Godwin you brought up earlier too. Like those guys all kind of go ahead and around Thielen, but are in a situation where they have a lot more work to share with either another receiver, or don't also have the proven background of the floor of Thielen.
Yeah, I'd rather have Thielen than either of those two Steelers by far. But just because, I don't know, Claypool's going to be hit and miss every week. Like, the Hall of Fame game was interesting to me, Rich. Just the more I watch it, you'd cheer for Claypool and then you'd be like, what are you doing? And up and down, up and down. And so I think that's how it's going to be with no O-line, Ben at the end of his career. There's a lot of risk in the Steelers' offensive passing game.
Where those guys all go, it's tricky because because Juju goes a little bit lower than them too, and then they basically signaled they want to run the football more, whether they'll be capable or able to or not. We're kind of talking about that too with the offensive line situation. They are going to run a lot of motion to kind of try to aid that, try to create some opportunities to kind of help that offensive line. But I mean, they're not going to run the same offense they ran last year, where we knew that they were just going to drop back, 65 to 70% of the time, throw quick hitters, and these guys are going to be able to stack receptions. That's going to be removed a little bit this year. So even a guy like Deontay Johnson, who has never been a guy that really projects to be a high touchdown scorer, if he loses that grip on target share, because that's what was floating in last year. He was just getting target after target after target. Even when the drops didn't matter, because he was just getting peppered with targets, and he had such a high PPR floor. If that kind of is up in the air a little bit, Claypool takes a step forward. Juju plays better then, or Juju's used in a different role than he was last year, because Juju really didn't play strictly the slot intermediate guy that like he was last year, because his first 3 years. He ran 85% of his routes in the slot. His average depth of target was just 6 yards. That's a far cry from what it was the first 3 years of his career. So if that changes back too, it could hurt a guy like Deontay Johnson. It's really tough, I think, to take a guy like Deontay Johnson right around wide receiver 20, like we talked about, some of the names around there. He goes right around Julio Jones now. Talked about him. DJ Moore, Odell Beckham goes after him. There's a situation where we look back on this in hindsight, and all those guys outscore him.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Rhys, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking I'll take Juju Smith-Schuster, where he's going like right around wide receiver 35 over either of those other two any day of the week, because one of them's probably going to catch a touchdown every week. So you're flipping a 3-sided coin essentially on who will catch it. And I'll much rather pay 3 or 4 rounds later for that third of a touchdown every week.
Yep.
Miss out on Julio.
But you also, by that, you could punt, you could go running back early, get a decent receiver, and then end up with Juju and Brown as your Antonio Brown as your 2-3 and be okay. I mean, or Thielen, Juju, and Brown, and be okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real good case for all those guys are undervalued at this point.
Oh yeah.
So, final question, and this does not relate to fantasy football as much, but with the schedule expanding to 17 games, do you think there should be an asterisk next to any of the records that were set in the 16-game season or even the 14-game seasons of old?
Yeah, I mean, it'll always be brought up whether it's an official asterisk or not. What's funny is when I added the game of projections and the projections this season, and just like seeing the amount of guys that were like flirting with 100 catches. Remember, that used to be a holy grail growing up. If a guy could catch 100 passes, it was such an amazing season. And now the way the NFL is being so pass heavy and adding a game, the amount of players that are even just from projection stance at 100 catches or higher, it's just like, whoa, like this is such a far cry from when I watched football growing up. So I mean, there will definitely be that. The big thing you hear about Kyle Pitts, right? All the history of rookie tight ends, right? Versus Kyle Pitts. Well, not only does Kyle Pitts have just the tarmac of being in a different situation, being a different type of player, but now he's an extra game too. Like he's got tremendous odds to break all these rookie tight end records. Like, so I mean, yeah, it might not be a complete asterisk, but it'll definitely always be brought up. Remember Randy Moss broke the touchdown record a couple years ago, and Jerry Rice, I believe, did it in 12 games the year there was a strike.
Yes.
Randy Moss still gets the record in the record books, but Jerry always gets kind of brought up like, well, hey, he did it in only this amount of games. So you'll have that, but we are, especially from a passing stance, I think the numbers are about to be borderline silly. And what that is going to happen is we've already seen some wide receivers with really good career numbers, like not be able to get in the hall. Well, it's been really hard for wide receivers to get into the hall, period. And we're going to have these guys retire with just silly numbers. And there's going to be so many of them by the time their career ends. And it's going to be really interesting to see how many of these guys can actually get in based on just the passing production from this era and not adding a game on top of this, especially if the NFL is not going to call any penalties like they did last year. I mean, for them not to call holding penalties at the lowest rate since it's been tracked, that's going to play right into offense's hands again. We will get crowd noise back this year, at least, or well, we think we will. We'll see. I doubt we get a full lockdown again, but that was a big factor too. Last year was such a high scoring season because of the penalties and teams not having home field advantage. It was the first year that I tracked that had road quarterbacks outperformed home quarterbacks. basically across the board, which is pretty unheard of. So I mean, we'll probably see that come back down too. But yeah, I really believe this era of passing and this passing, these are about to be insane with the extra game added on, just the way the game is played. And if they decide not to call penalties again, where we might see some crazy numbers.
So 2 things, Rich, I threw this at Rhys earlier today. Devontae Adams has a chance for 200 targets this year. Fair or not fair?
Yes, fair.
How many did he have last year?
191.
Well, let's see. He missed 2 games. What did he finish with? Did he still finish with like 190, right?
Yeah. I was thinking like 190 or 193.
But you think about
he had 150. I'm sorry. He had 149 in 14 games. So 10 a game. And one of those games he played hurt.
Yeah. So he has a chance. And I just meant he was on pace for 190 last year or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, taking out the one he
160.
got hurt. Well, taking out the one he got hurt.
Yeah.
And he has a chance. The other ones, the other implication, Rhys, and I wanted to ask you this is, I think there's going to be a higher injury rate because they're playing 1 extra game and only having 1 bye week. Still
True. But there's not this much high injury rate because of because they don't have that preseason game.
But they didn't play that much. Yeah.
And there's still one big name that was getting injured every year in preseason, at least.
Possibly. But
I mean, 2 years ago, Michael Thomas had 185. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely in his range of outcomes, I believe, to at least push it. Also, the Packers probably won't be as good record-wise as they were last year, just the way things set up for them. Schedule-wise, them being just so hyper-efficient, all those things will come back. They'll have to chase game script a little bit. And when you're not having as much efficiency, it leads to more volume. So I think it's definitely at least in the range of outcomes for him to get there, whether or not he gets the full 200 or not. But it's definitely up there.
What do you think about injuries? See, I think that you could make a case that there's going to be a higher injury rate as well.
I believe it'll come down from last year, just because, and this is not my area because I'm not a doctor, but, I remember Dr. Gene and Edwin Porras from Fantasy Points doing a study that last year that correlated last year's reduced training camp and lack of preseason activity to kind of the 2011 season when they had the lockout, and talking about the amount of soft tissue injuries that were in that season. And that kind of came to fruition last year. So just them having an actual training camp and an actual ramp up to the season actually might help the soft tissue injury kind of front and kind of go back to normal. But that's not really my area. That'd just be 100% guesswork on my part, kind of doing that. But I know last year, those guys were both kind of highlighting that there was going to be a lot more hamstrings and soft tissue injuries because of what happened last offseason, and that played out in totality. It was up last year.
Yeah, I was just thinking you had 6% more games, 6% more carries for Derrick Henry and all those guys, 6% here. That's all
I'm curious to just know if we see the NFL adopt anything like the NBA has done, especially at the running back position, adding a game. Yeah. Will there be any load management with these guys? A guy like Derrick Henry comes to mind, or these teams that have capable backups. Like if the Browns had a game on Sunday where Nick Chubb had 27 touches or say 25 touches, and they turn around and play in a Thursday game, why not just give him the week off and let Kareem Hunt play? The Cowboys could do that with Tony Pollard, the Packers with AJ Dillon, the 49ers with Mostert and Sermon, the Bucks with all the guys that we talked about. I'm really curious if this added game does anything in terms of that. If we start to see any load management type weeks, especially at the running back position, and these guys that get all these high caliber touches, because to me that would make a lot of inherent sense. But right. We know when the bullets are flying and you're trying to win these games, because there are only 17 of them still, which is lighter than still all the other sports. Teams want to win games, but to me, especially on like those short weeks, it would make sense for us to see some load management.
Yeah, that was part of where I was going. Is I was thinking we could see carry, maybe not Henry this year, but in the future, somebody break the number of carries record or passes attempted or whatever,
Well, the carries record's well north of 400 by James Wilder.
Yeah, that one's probably going to be tough. Anything that involves rushing is still probably going to be tough. Yeah. But these passing stats, like this era is going to blow. Like I said, I'm really worried about not worried about it, but just curious to see like when some of these guys finish their careers, and from a receiver, perspective, if they're hurt by this era that they played in. And we might even see it a little. We've seen it a little bit with the guys. Isaac Bruce took him a while to get in. We're still seeing, Torrey Holt still trying to fight to get in. And what about when guys like Brandon Marshall come up and Steve Smith? Those are guys I believe had Hall of Fame type careers, but are they going to be guys that get in the first ballot? Probably not, the way it goes typically with these guys. But and then go on, for these guys that are currently in the midst of their careers right now, and when they wrap up their careers, just what the career numbers are going to look like for some of these players, it's going to be absolutely bonkers.
Oh yeah, and like even Fitzgerald or some of those guys are, easy Hall of Fame, in 5 years or 6. And so it's going to be even harder for the Torrey Holts if they're not in by then. But I was surprised you knew the Wilder one of 400 carries, because I would have thought it would have been a Steven Jackson or one of those kind of guys.
Old football cards.
Yeah.
That's the way, man. That's why he's hosting the show.
That's why it's his name, not mine. He's the I'm just carrying the mail and carrying his bags for him.
I'm glad someone does.
Yeah, I bet you are. Rich, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you guys want to have me, I'm welcome, as long as I can make the time. It gets tougher in season, but I always love coming out and talking to you guys, and just trying to keep attachment to Rhys for when I have to apply for a job, one day under him.
You do hold the record so far.
Yeah.
I mean, of who's been on the show the most times.
Oh, awesome. I'll take it.
Don't worry. I'm pretty sure the moment I see a Rich Hribar on application, I'll accept it.
That's why I'm coming on, man. I'm clearing the lane right now.
Preparing for your future, just like I'm trying to do.
Have a good one, Rich.
All right. Appreciate it, guys.